Welcome into PressBox Live. I'm Stan the Fan Charles of PressBox and PressBoxOnline.com. With me is my co-host Gary Stein. How are you, Gary?
Ready to put down a couple bucks. We'll have a good show today, Stanley.
All right. I think it's a safe bet that we're going to have a good show tonight. I have to mention before I introduce our guest, Bill Ordine of Gambling.com, that PressBox Live is again brought to you by C3 American Exteriors. Go to their website at c3america.com to get a brand new roof for just the cost of your insurance deductible. I know these guys. I trust them. Again, if you're in the market for a new roof, C3 American Exteriors, and check out their website, c3america.com. I did allude to our guest being Bill Ordine, now of Gambling.com, longtime member of the Philadelphia Inquirer in Philly, also Baltimore Sun, and most recently after that, PressBox, where we have a great relationship with Bill. Bill, first of all, congratulations on getting a real full-time gig in an area that you are one of the leading experts in this country. Gambling.com is your home. Tell us a little bit about that before we go into talking about the Maryland sports legalized gambling legislation.
Yeah, and certainly it is an attention-grabbing URL.
Yes, it is.
And the owners,
it's kind of like my URL, dummy.com, you know.
Not as good.
They paid a lot of money for it, and that I do not get. But it is not a gambling website. It's a news website, and it is part of a family of websites. And one called, by the way, bookies.com, which is also not a gambling website, but a news website, an information website. And my job is to report on and cover legal issues, legislative issues, and business issues regarding online gaming and sports wagering. That essentially is my wheelhouse. Although occasionally I will write things that are of interest to gamblers.
Yeah. So I know that as well.
Yep.
But I have to say it's very similar. The angle that they're coming at is sort of the Sports Business Journal created a very lucrative product by just zooming in on the business of sports.
Right.
This is sort of the business of gaming, correct?
Yeah, and that's what these guys do. They are zooming in on, as you put it, the business end of online wagering and sports wagering, and especially in the public markets. Online gaming companies that have gone public have simply just exploded. I mean, DraftKings, we used to talk about DraftKings a couple of years ago as a kind of this hazy fantasy sports outfit. I mean, these guys are worth billions and billions of dollars in, in capital value. Actually, DraftKings, I think, exceeds MGM International in terms of its valuation.
So let me ask you before, and we'll let Gary open up to talk about Maryland, but just as an aside, FanDuel and DraftKings, when they began to be in our vision all the time,
yeah,
is this the end game that they were playing for all along, or were they just simply fantasy sports sites that were opportunistic in jumping in as legalized sports betting began to grow across the country?
I don't know that it's neither or, but certainly it leans toward the latter. I don't know that either of those companies could have envisioned what the valuations would be of their companies really a decade down the road. I started covering FanDuel in the year, I think, 2010. And now it is owned by a foreign company. It's owned by a company called Flutter, and is part of a publicly traded company. And Flutter, which trades on the London exchange, is thinking of spinning off FanDuel on an American exchange. Now, did FanDuel have this vision, when they first started in 2010? And I covered their first national tournament, which was in Las Vegas. I covered by the phone. I was at the Inquirer at the time. And I mean, I think the big prize was $25,000. So, I mean, did they imagine that this was going to be the end game? I don't think so.
Aaron, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Bill, Leah, let's kind of zero in on Maryland a little bit as Maryland continues to compete with Virginia and Pennsylvania, its neighbors, for the sports gambling dollar. Let's take you back to November of 2020.
Yeah.
Sports gambling went to referendum here in the state of Maryland. It passed overwhelmingly, 2/3 to 1/3. Take us over the last few months in about 60 seconds or so from November to today. How does this thing get to market? Where are we in the process?
Where we are in the process is this: we do have a bill that's got edges to it. It's got some form. In this time around, the year 2021, the House of Delegates took the lead. In the year 2020, the state Senate took the lead. This time, the House of Delegates took the lead. And shortly after we came out of the chute, the referendum did what it did in November. We come out of the chute in, when the session starts in, what was it, January of 2021? Sorry, losing the dates. And in short order, the House of Delegates, in fact, the Speaker of the House, Adrian Jones, dropped a House Bill 940 that gave form to a sports wagering bill. And that's where we are.
So let me ask you, and if I have my numbers correct, what's on the table right now in the legislature for the state of Maryland is they're talking about potentially 22 in-person locations where somebody can go to a brick and mortar, whether it be a racetrack, a stadium, privately owned businesses, etc. We'll talk about that in a minute. They can go to a brick and mortar and put down a bet. And we're also talking about 15 options for online potential /online/mobile betting. My question to you is, that's different than the initial bill that was being brought up. It's much larger, actually. My question is, how and why and when did that happen?
Gary, you're very astute. You're right. It is much different. How did it come about? Actually, through the legislative process, like you've heard the old cliche about laws and sausages, right?
You don't want to know how they're made.
Right, exactly. And that's not how this bill started. When it first dropped, it was not nearly this expansive. And after the House of Delegates heard from, what we'll call stakeholders, they decided that they needed to expand the potential for license holders, both at the retail level, at the online level. And that's how we got here. I mean, there are lots of stakeholders out there who said the original parameters were too constrictive, if that's the word. Is that the right word? Did I use the right word? Okay.
Constrictive.
Perhaps.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So
restrictive.
restricted. So wait, so Stan.
Well, it made it all kind of tight. And but a lot of that had to do, and this is an important point to be made here, they were trying to open the field of license holders to minority equity ownership. And one of the broad concepts of doing that is to increase your universe of licenses. And that's how we got to where we are.
Mm-hmm. Stan, if I could ask just a quick follow-up to that.
Go right ahead, Gary. You're doing great.
Bill, I'm assuming, and I think this is a right assumption, that in order to get a license, right, you got to pay a fee to the state of Maryland. What's the fee cost, number one? And number two, how much additional revenue will the state of Maryland make by opening up this licensure to 22 and 15?
Yeah, I would have to go back and take a look at the bill to take a look at the ante-ups. They're pretty big, particularly on the online. The bricks. I
mean, we're talking over a couple $100,000.
I think we're talking a minimum of $250,000. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. The online in particular.
Yeah.
Now the Class B licenses, because there are two categories of bricks and mortars, what they refer to as, I want to call them, they're retail. Generically, we call them, retail licensees, and they're much cheaper. But of course, they don't have the same potential for revenue. Right. So consequently, the online is a lot bigger number. I'd have to go back and take a look at what those numbers are now. As far as projected revenue, I'm not even going to go there. I mean, I can remember how overinflated the projections were for the Horseshoe Casino in Baltimore, and how the Horseshoe never really, hit those marks that were tossed out there by supposedly astute gambling prognosticators. So,
Gotcha.
Bill, let me, before we dig in a little bit and dive more deeply into this particular legislation, I want to go back a few years ago to when gaming came into the state of Maryland, that we got legalized gaming.
yeah,
How is this? Because when you think about it, we had an election, I think, that made the way for this referendum to take place, this past election.
yeah.
So we've already gone through one election, a second election, and it looks now, if I'm reading the tea leaves right, that this thing is not going to actually come to fruition at the end of this legislature. Okay, this legislative session.
Yeah.
I could be wrong on that, but I just want to go backwards. How slow was Maryland in getting up to speed on just gaming? Opening up a Maryland Live.
Yeah,
Or,
well, I'm going to be judgmental here.
Yeah.
Extremely slow.
Yeah.
Inexcusably slow, to tell you the truth.
that's what I was hoping you'd say and counting on you to say.
Yeah, well, and predicated on essentially a 20th century paradigm of gambling. And I think that this is true of a lot of lay people, including legislators, that, what they know about gambling is what they see in George Raft movies or Robert De Niro movies. Frankly, that is the case. They really don't have the vision to look into the 21st century and see what gaming, what gaming would be in the 21st century. And I heard legislators back before PASPA was overturned, and other states were trying to get to the front of the line by passing sports wagering legislation.
You're talking about states like New Jersey and
Yep.
Delaware, and I think even Nebraska.
Well,
something.
Nebraska's a little behind the curve, but
Okay.
Pennsylvania, for instance,
Yeah.
a number of states, anticipating that PASPA might go down, which it did, that they started, figuring out frameworks for online gambling, in particular online sports gambling. And Maryland wasn't interested in going that way. And I remember talking to a particular delegate, and I will not identify him, who said, well, look at Las Vegas. Sports gambling amounts to like 1% of their gross revenue. And I'm like banging my head against the wall saying, excuse me, you're talking about a bricks and mortar situation.
Right.
Now, what if people can sit home with their smartphones and gamble on games as they're watching them on TV? Do you still think it's going to be 1% of gross gambling revenues in Nevada under those circumstances? But those were concepts that I don't think legislators around here, they were looking at a lot of problems and, a lot of situations. And to listen to a guy like me who's trying to, be, the amazing Prescott about what gambling is going to look like in the 21st century, they could care less.
So let me ask you the question then. You looked when I said, I don't think they'll get this together in time for this legislative session. You were looking at me like you didn't necessarily agree, but are they attacking this with any sense of urgency at all? And maybe is that because it's not urgent for the state, but there's a lot of other businesses, including Pressbox and some other media enterprises, where this is very important legislation.
Yep, exactly. Boy, that one, because the landscape of the country has changed so much. If you asked me this question 3 months ago, I would say there's going to be great urgency.
Yeah.
Now we've got a new administration. States and municipalities are looking at a lot more money coming out of Washington, D.C. So do they really need the nickels and dimes that will come from sports gambling? The answer to that might be maybe not so much. So, however, it is a real hot button issue. I think it's better than 50-50. And I know that there's discussion about whether or not they will go to summer session over this. I mean, I've seen them go to some recession over other gambling issues.
But let me just interrupt for 1 second. When you say you think there's a better than 50% chance,
Yeah,
you
not much.
mean that that this legislation will get determined and we will have an exact date of when this will go online?
No, there's no such thing as exact dates when it comes to the state legislatures.
But to try and get it in before football season starts.
Well, maybe sometime during football season.
Okay.
But before the end of the calendar year, let's say that. What are the chances of it happening before the next session opens up? That's probably a better way of putting it.
Okay. Then you think there's more than a 50% chance of that, right?
Yeah, I do.
All right, Gary, go ahead.
Bill, run me through a couple scenarios here for a second. You just mentioned the mobile application, right? Somebody's sitting in their home with their phone, watching the game, whatever, betting, right?
Yeah.
They could be on a Zoom right now with us, Gary, and Bill could be betting right now.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So give me a state right now where that's legal, Bill.
Oh gosh. Trying to think of-
Virginia, DC,
Oh, yeah.
Virginia, DC.
Okay. All right. So let's say I'm sitting in DC, right?
Yeah.
But I have a Baltimore area code phone number. Can I do it?
No, the geolocation is actually geographic. When the gambling website wants to identify whether you are a bona fide player, they use a technology that is longstanding called geolocation, and they can probably pinpoint you at your address. I mean, if you're at the Burger King making a bet, they probably know you're at the Burger King.
Right. So I'm saying if I'm in DC and I have a Baltimore phone, I can do it when I'm in DC, correct?
Yes, yeah. The answer
Yes.
is
Okay.
That's
So
always,
it doesn't matter what area code your phone number is in. It matters where you are.
correct.
Okay.
Okay, that's something new for me. I did not understand that. Okay.
Right. I was unclear on that. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's good to know. Okay. By the same token, if you have an Arizona area code, but you're in DC, obviously you can do it, right?
Right.
Okay. So it matters as far as location is concerned. So how far are we behind? Just an estimate in terms of revenue right now to DC and Virginia and Pennsylvania. I'm thinking New Jersey, all of the states that surround us. How much revenue do you think they've collected in the last however long it's been, while Maryland has collected zero?
Okay, let me pinpointing that of other states relative to Maryland is really impossible. But I will give an example, an extreme example, admittedly. But in December, which was kind of the height of sports gambling over the last several months, because of the football playoffs and NBA getting going, all that kind of stuff. New Jersey had $900 million in handle. Now, that is an enormous number, and it needs to be taken into context. Of that $900 million, maybe 6-7% of that went to the operators as revenue, and then a fraction of that went to the state as tax money. So that is sort of an example, but to say how far behind this state has gotten, Maryland has gotten, is probably impossible to figure out right now.
But we are behind, correct?
Oh, no question.
Okay.
Because
that was the point I was making with my
Zero.
earlier
Yeah, I
question.
just wanted
Is
to make
that,
sure.
yeah, go ahead.
When you got zero tax revenue,
Zero.
that
Bill,
tells
also, let me ask one other question before I turn it over to Stan. Most of the time when I think about sports gambling, I think about professional teams.
Yeah.
I think about the NFL, I think about NBA, baseball, etc. Okay. When it comes to collegiate sports, let's take the University of Maryland, for example. Would you be able to bet on Maryland in Maryland?
as far as I know, they are not excluded. Yeah,
Okay.
that is a hot button topic in many states, whether or not home collegiate teams should be fair game for wagers. I don't think there's an exclusion here over that. you know, I could be wrong, but I don't think that there's an exclusion for the University of Maryland or other Maryland universities. Could be.
How do other states handle it?
By and large, I mean, it's a state by state thing. I know it's a big discussion in Jersey.
Okay.
Jersey lets you bet on everything. But it has been a big discussion in New Jersey. So, it's been handled on a state by state basis, I think primarily. They allow it. Most states allow wagering on a in-state amateur team. Now, there's a cutoff. You're not going to be able to wager on a high school team. That is
Darn, I had a great bet,
so that is that seems to be verboten everywhere. So
as it should be.
As it should be.
Let me pick up on Gary's question because I want to follow up with that. And the fact that you can bet on professional teams, do the leagues and the teams feel that they should be paid because they are the source of what you're wagering on, or do they take the tack like, hey, it's very lucrative for us because these casinos and licensees are going to spend a lot of money with us? Or are they greedy and want both sides of it, Bill?
So Stan, I want to know which professional sports league has St. Francis of Assisi as its commissioner?
I think we're going to have to think about
the
that.
Answer is none. Yeah.
Okay, so let me talk about that because it's just coming. It is just coming, and it keeps coming every day. The leagues and the teams want their cut. They are explicit now. There is no more shadow boxing over this issue. And right now, the main way they are looking to get a cut is by selling their data. Statistics are no longer statistics. Statistics are data. If you call statistics data, you got to get back in the time machine, go back to 1998 or something. But statistics are now called data. And this is about basically giving gambling organizations, wagering operations, access to the data. There's the story just broke yesterday. I mean, I'm sure you guys saw a story about how all the TV networks are coming up with what, $100 billion to the NFL. You saw that story.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Folded in that story is that the leagues also want $100 million a year for their data. That's also not part of that same deal, but that's also part of a conversation regarding.
Let me just interrupt and dig down in that question. In other words, they're saying that without you owning the data that we produce, you wouldn't be able to come up with odds that would make any sense.
Well, that's exactly right. And particularly on the type of wagers you could expect to be popular over the next couple of years. For instance, let me use an example. We should all identify with that because we see it every Sunday night. Every Sunday night, we see the Sunday night game, right?
Yeah.
And there is some feature in there about who is the fastest NFL player to the end zone, right? Chris
DK Metcalf.
Yeah, right. Right. DK Metcalf, that Hunt kid, somebody. It's never me. But that kind of information is garnered by embedding RFID chips in the uniforms of the players, in their helmets and their shoulder pads, all over their uniforms, and then placing receivers all over the stadiums. So given that kind of setup, it's only with access, and the league will control that data.
Right.
It's only with access to that data that DraftKings, for instance, and they're just a hypothetical, I don't want to sue them, but that some gambling website can offer that proposition bet. Who do you think is going to be the fastest guy to the end zone this Sunday? And that's a proprietary bit of data. I mean, that's not like touchdown passes. Like everybody knows how many touchdown passes, Lamar Jackson threw, but not everybody knows, to the 10th of a mile, how fast a guy made it to the end zone over, say, 40 yards. So it's going to be that kind of proprietary data that the leagues are essentially going to copyright.
So are the league,
And they broker it through, by the way, they broker it through intermediaries. And those intermediaries will pay big numbers for access to that data and turn around and sell it, broker it to the gambling websites.
so at this point in time, what is the league's position? Do they sort of just said, are they collectively sort of saying, let's just let it grow until it's, and then we're going to cut it off unless we're paid for it?
No, they're already in negotiations for the money.
They're already in negotiations.
Yeah.
So it's a fait accompli that they are going to get their ounce of flesh out of betting,
It's
the
official.
leagues.
I mean, if it doesn't happen, okay, I'm wrong. It'll happen.
It'll happen.
Hmm.
We're talking to Bill Ordine. He writes for
Fascinating.
gambling. He writes for gambling.com, former writer with the Press Box, Baltimore Sun, and of course the Philadelphia Inquirer, where he spent a huge portion of his career. Bill, the casinos, if we agree that it's collectively a huge chunk of money, but the brick and mortar places, is this important to them to actually be cited as places to go? And if so, why is that?
Because all revenue is important to a gambling enterprise. And I mean, you think about, an organization like the Cordish companies.
Sure.
They're already partners with FanDuel. So, and I believe that they're partners with FanDuel up in Pennsylvania, where sports gambling is in operation. If I'm wrong on that, I'm sure David will give me a call. But I think I'm right. So it's important to the casinos because it's an added value element to a trip to the casino.
Okay.
To be able to go to the casino, and in addition to playing slot machines or blackjack or
You're walking through the bar and there's TVs on
Yeah.
and you can wager on a game.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And there'll be kiosks, where, you can stop there and put a $20 bill in, and maybe make, 10 different bets at $2 a shot, so that sort of thing. Now, is that going to be a huge moneymaker? No, it will not. But it creates a stickiness to the property.
Yeah.
It encourages people to stay in the building and, to be part of the atmosphere of gambling. So it's important to bricks and mortar places, to be in on this. Plus, they're going to make sure that they get an online license as well.
We
Bill,
know. Let me finish up one more, Gary, then you'll get a couple. Unless I've gone past my limit, Gary. Did I go past my limit? No.
I haven't been keeping count.
Okay.
I didn't stand on a pitch count here.
So the question is, the casinos, the casinos and the facilities of professional sports teams. We understand that the Ravens and the Orioles will both have facilities in their brick and mortar kiosks of some kind or sports books inside their facilities. Is that important to them?
Yeah. Yes, it is. In fact, at the last work session, I think for the Senate, it was a work session, not a hearing. A guy showed up from the Stadium Authority to argue about how important that would be for the Stadium Authority.
Yeah.
Because they need people going through the turnstiles. Now here's the thing about what we're just talking about, and I think it bears watching. There's not a lot of clarity here, but in Virginia, the Washington football team actually got a gambling license. They're not just the landlord who would be hosting tenants.
They actually got the license.
Yeah, in partnership with FanDuel. Now, they have made the point that they are not a bookmaker. Okay, and I believe they're partners with FanDuel. I hope I got that right. And they, FanDuel is a bookmaker. The WFT wants to make the point. Okay. Is there a great distinction there? I don't know. This is going to be something that requires and deserves examination. Now, coming back to your beloved Orioles and Ravens, the original way this bill that is going to be discussed tomorrow was written, it essentially allowed for sportsbook apparatus to be placed at the facilities, at M&T.
At Camden Yards and M&T Bank Stadium.
A revised version of the bill actually makes the lessees at those facilities eligible for Class A retail licenses.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now,
Garrett, go ahead.
So,
yeah.
Bill, I have so many questions for you. I don't even know where to start. But I'm going to start here with the scenarios again, because I think that's what most people want to know. Can I do this? Can I do that? Right? Okay. So if there's kiosks at Oriole Park and M&T Bank Stadium, right? But there's no game being played, right? The Orioles are out of town. I'm walking around downtown during lunchtime. I'm on my phone. I'm looking at the line. The Orioles are in Boston tonight, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Can I go into Oriole Park and put a wager?
Gary, that's an excellent question. The way the bill was originally written, the answer to the question is no.
No.
Because it was the way the bill was originally written. But this is when the teams would have essentially been landlords to an operator. It was only on game days. And the same was true of Pimlico, by the way. It only held true for race days.
It kind of doesn't make sense, though, does it, Bill?
Well, I don't know. People have asked me about this. I don't know who would walk into M&T Bank Stadium in May, put down a baseball bet. Is that what we're talking about? Or
well, but you could do it at Camden Yards. I mean, that would be natural.
I don't know.
I mean, I don't know.
What would make more sense to me, and I'm sorry to jump in on your question, Gary, would places like Jimmy's Seafood, the Costas Inn, Phillips, would any of them be able to afford a license?
It's too small.
But
I'm waiting to hear what Bill says.
There are two questions, actually. Can they, according to the way the bill looks like it's written, the answer is, yeah, they can do that.
Yeah.
Would they, kind of depends on the threshold of the fee and what they project their revenue would be. So, I mean, the way it's currently couched, yeah, I mean, business, other than what we've been talking about, casinos, racetracks, and sports facilities, can apply. I mean, press box could apply. I mean, I'm just only being semi-facetious. I mean,
We need to borrow money from Gary to.
But
hey, I got my checkbook right here. It's handy.
I don't know. Imagine a sports news organization that had a lot of muscle.
Yeah.
Is generating, a lot of copy, a lot of editorial materials.
So can I jump ahead of Gary and ask a question real quick? The Baltimore Sun is supposedly going to be bought by a nonprofit.
Yeah.
I know what the answer to the question is. Can Pressbox work a deal with a casino or something to get advertising? Can a nonprofit be a player in that marketplace?
Well, I don't know anything about what the restrictions are on nonprofit companies relative to what the IRS would okay with. So I won't even begin to try to answer that.
All right. Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, so Bill, again, scenarios, right?
Yeah.
I'm at an Oriole game, beautiful summer evening, and I can sit there in my seat and bet.
Yep.
Bet on the next pitch, bet on what the batter does, bet on who steals the next base, whatever it is. There could be a million different things going on to the 20,000 or so, however many people that are there that are rooting for all types of different things that are on their phones making bets.
Yeah.
Is
that
that
have
is that a
nothing, that have
possible
nothing to
scenario?
do, that have nothing to do with the win, who's winning the game or not.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That was kind of my point.
Okay, go ahead.
Right? I'm not saying I'm against it or for it. It doesn't matter. I'm
Yeah.
saying the possibility exists that all these different conflicting things could be important to people
Yeah.
during a game. Correct?
Yeah, I don't see why not, frankly.
Okay.
I've been talking about this forever.
Stan, don't you think this is? I mean, we don't. What are we
Gary,
to
I've been
expect?
playing fantasy baseball for over 30 years, 35 years. And I've been conflicted, and I learned a lesson early on: root for your team. You meaning my fantasy team.
No, no.
That's the lesson I learned, you know.
But Stan, this is, and Bill, this is going to put, okay, what the scenario that you just said,
Yeah.
okay, that you've been doing for 30 years, that's going to be that on steroids now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, it's sort of interesting that Gary brings this up. At one of the, I think it was a hearing in front of the House of Delegates. It was this session. I think it was the House of Delegates. I don't think it was the Senate. I could be wrong. But there was a representative from the NFLPA. And for people who are not familiar, that's the players union. And he was concerned about both the players being harassed and the players' families
Sure.
being harassed within family sections. I mean, I'm not making any of this up.
Yeah.
And he was looking for some sort of response from the legislative body, whether it was the House or the Senate at that point. Like somehow they were supposed to come up with a safety zone for player families. So, and there was basically a non-response to that.
Well, as someone who played horse racing from the time I was 13 until like my mid 20s, I was heavily addicted to horse racing.
Yeah.
I used to yell at a few jockeys. I don't think I ever threatened a life, but you would definitely harass a jockey. And I know people that bet highlight used to harass the guys with the
Cestas.
those guys. So
Well,
anyway, this is a
highlights and
fascinating discussion. Bill.
Fascinating topic.
Bill, let me just close with this because we'll get you on again. So this is going to be heard in the Senate tomorrow. Do you think a week from now we'll have a much better idea whether this stands a snowball's chance in hell at that we'll be able to bet in Maryland by say August 1st?
Well, I wish I could be more definitive about that. I've always said, who knows? And I'm going to say it again. Who knows?
Okay.
We'll be closer. We'll hear more arguments. We'll hear more opinions. We'll get maybe a little more clarity. And maybe even senators, state senators, and state delegates have already been talking about this and have already been coming to a meeting of the minds over these issues. So I don't think it's just going to start flat-footed at tomorrow's hearing. I'm sure that the Senate and the House have been, exchanging notions and ideas. So we'll be closer. How close? I couldn't begin to tell you.
But you'll be watching and paying attention to it and writing about it on gambling.com. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I will be watching that entire thing.
All right. And will you come back on with us maybe right when the legislature closes for this
I'll
year?
bet he will.
I absolutely.
That's a safe bet, Gary.
Glad
It really is. Hey guys, I really appreciate it. Bill is always fascinating. Gary, great questions, great scenarios. Want to remind everybody that Pressbox Live is brought to you each and every Monday and Wednesday nights by C3 American Exteriors. I know these guys, they do quality work. Go to their website at C3, that's the letter C, the number 3, c3america.com to get a brand new roof for just the cost of your insurance deductible. C3 American exteriors. For Bill Ordine, Gary Stein, I'm Stan the Fan. I'll see you guys on Monday night with Ross Grimsley and another guest from the world of baseball. Good night, everybody.
Good night.